The word of the Lord according to the 130th Psalm. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy. If you, O Lord, should mark inquiries, O Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, that you may be feared. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. And my soul waits for the Lord, more than watchmen for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is plentiful redemption. He will redeem Israel from all of his iniquities. The word of the Lord. Please be seated. Again, we thank Katie for this wonderful message this morning. Even though it's my voice, may you be able to hear her heart within it, and may her words this morning encourage you and bless you. So, the liturgical calendar theme for this week was very much about ears, listening, and even more than that, sensory connections. Not in the physical sense, maybe, but certainly in the spiritual sense. Listening is a common thread in biblical texts. We are asked to listen to one another. We are asked to listen to God. We are asked to listen to our hearts, to listen to those who challenge us, and to the things that we probably should not be listening to. I know that our physiology is made for our ears to listen, and that they are the only physical piece of our bodies that can hear things. I feel like faith listening might just be its own category of listening, one that asks us to use our ears because they provide us with the act of hearing, but I don't know that it stops there. Stick with me here. Have you ever heard live music and it feels like a total body experience? When the hearing moves into feeling, and the feeling activates your heart and then your mind, and then maybe a memory pops into your head, or maybe you imprint a memory from that particular moment into your brain. In that moment, listening becomes a full sensory experience. This poetic psalm is a full sensory experience, as are all of the lectionary readings for today. In Genesis chapter 3, we see Adam and Eve hear God walking. They feel the cool of the day. They talk about eating forbidden fruit. This is a sensory experience for Adam and Eve with God in the garden. If we move their story into a practical application for us today, it might be for us to listen. Might it be for us to listen when God is speaking, to slow down and lean into feeling the physical world around us, to be honest with what we consume. Maybe this one is a little metaphorical, but it's still important for us to consider what we consume. This story is an ask to be present in how we experience the world, how our actions affect one another, how our actions affect our relationship with God. What does it look like when we only choose to connect with one sensory piece of our humanity? What is not tended to when we do that? In Mark chapter 3, we see Jesus with his newly appointed disciples in his home. There are so many people present at his home that they are packed in so tight they cannot eat. Because of this, Jesus' family seeks to remove him from the house because, in their minds, he must be out of his mind to be in this house with all of these humans. This isn't in Katie's message, but as an introvert, being crammed in a house with a lot of people that you can't even eat, that's like a nightmare for me. Scribes try to challenge Jesus' miracle work by claiming that he was somehow able to harness the power of Satan for this work. Jesus responds that the use of Satan to remove Satan makes no sense. The accusation is that Jesus had an unclean spirit and was not fit to interact with those who needed healing. They believe that Jesus was hurting people and not healing, and the scribes came to this conclusion because they were not part of the miracles Jesus was performing for these people. What I imagine is that Jesus' family and these scribes could not fully understand what Jesus was doing and how he was doing it, because they were not an active part of this community that Jesus was creating or of his works inside of it. Sometimes we cannot describe a feeling that happens. We are near someone. We cannot describe how we feel healed when we spend time with certain people. We know, we feel, we hear, we smell how healing and care move in these moments, but trying to find the words can be a challenge. If we are not open to allowing all our senses to be part of the things that we experience, the people that we engage with, if we are not allowing our guards to fall and to be all in our neighbor love building, how can we begin to try to fully understand those we are to be building community with? In this story, Jesus calls those who have been experiencing all this community his mother and brothers. He shifted those important love titles, usually reserved for a nuclear family, to those people who chose to be all in. Jesus asks us to experience life with those around us. He asks us to see and feel not just the world around us, but he asks us to really engage in one another's worlds. I read this as a diving in and allowing connection to come in all sensory forms. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 brings us home in this want and ask to be all present in our faith walks. We believe and speak. We are raised to be brought with Jesus. We are asked to extend grace to others for the glory of God. When we think about extending grace to one another, that comes in all forms, in listening, in physical movement with one another, not around one another. Grace asks us to intentionally interact with things that maybe we struggle with. Grace asks us to not lead with judgment. Grace asks us to intentionally follow Jesus. Grace asks us to step into being uncomfortable in those sensory places that are hard for us. Paul writes that although our outer self will waste away, if we live in a grace-filled walk, our inner self, our heart, will continue to grow. Paul was focused on growing the church, but he was also focused on the believers becoming people of character, people who love, and people who live in community. The things unseen are eternal. Our home with God is not built with hands, but is built with things bigger than those physical pieces of our bodies. The connections in these stories, for me, is really leaning into how we connect to one another. I read Psalm 130 to Leo, who is Katie's son, and asked him what he heard in the reading. He told me it was a wonderful poem that he hears devotion of life to God. So I read it again. And I completely understand how he came to that conclusion from this poem. My soul waits. With you there is forgiveness. My soul waits for the Lord. The plea for mercy is a starting place for most of us. We talk to God when things are bad or difficult, when we aren't getting what we think we want or need. We cry out when we feel wronged. We point fingers when we think someone gets it easier than we do. But do we sit in that space not only to hear God, but to consider if we have really put our whole selves into engagement, into connection, into listening, into loving? Are we aware of how we listen and speak to those around us when we feel on edge? It sounds like a big ask, doesn't it? But I feel like the ask to love our neighbors as ourselves is too a large ask. So maybe we break it down. When we start to close off, take a breath and try to open back up. When we come head to head with someone with vastly different values than ours, show grace. When we see a physical need, maybe a bottle of water, a pair of socks, a meal, a high five, if we can provide those things, do it. And then thank God for allowing you that moment to connect with another person. It is so easy to connect with people we do church life with, and it's much scarier to connect with those outside of these four walls. So what is an easy starting point? 1, say good morning to someone or hold the door open for another, or even better, do both. The most incredible way we can show others who Jesus was and is, and what he asks of us, and how to build his kingdom is to acknowledge others in their presence, to see those who are not seen, to pepper kindness to those in our daily lives. I talk about this a lot, I know, but I continue to see in my own life how loving people in simple ways continues to grow God's kingdom. It continues the mission Jesus had when he was crucified. It continues the mission that the Romans wanted to stop, that hate wants to do away with. So how are you going to love someone with all of your spiritual sensory pieces? I am sorry I am unable to speak today, but I hope if you do connect with others during this week and in the coming weeks, that you share with me when I am back and healthy what that looked like. Let's keep Jesus' walk moving forward. I love you all. Amen.